Coming up on this week's show, the Atari VCS is almost here.
What is the big news from Sega?
And we go behind the scenes on Bad Influence with Violet Berlin.
This week's show is brought to you by Beer 52, the world's most popular craft beer discovery club.
Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 227, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And welcome to this week's show where we reminisce about the olden days of video games. We chat about classic consoles, classic games, and actually with everything going on in the world right now, not a bad time to live in the past for an hour or so, I think, is it, guys?
Not at all. Have you guys been playing a lot more games than usual?
Yeah, I think so. I've been trying to kind of just, live in my own little bubble at the moment, and just playing some retro games has been quite therapeutic, I think.
Well, at the moment, though, there does seem to be, even with like lockdown going on and everything, there is some really exciting gaming news going on now. In a moment, we're going to talk about this thing that maybe we slightly overhyped on last week's show, this mega announcement from Sega that everyone was talking about last week. We think we know what it is, and everyone's been talking about it on our socials as well over the last couple of days. We've actually left it until like the last minute to record this show. We're doing it at like 2:30 on Thursday afternoon, just because we wanted to get this big Sega news in there. Is it a bit of a disappointment, though? Well, we'll talk about that in just a minute. But today, we are going to be joined by someone who was a really big part of my childhood. Now, obviously, before the days of the internet, it was all about gaming magazines and, of course, gaming television shows. Now, about a month ago, we had Dominic Diamond on, who was behind one of the biggest gaming shows on British TV, Games Master. We got the inside story on that show. It was a brilliant episode. Everyone loved that. This week, we're going to be talking about the other show that was on at the same time, and that, of course, was Bad Influence, because we're going to be joined by the fantastic Violet Berlin. Now, how incredible was Bad Influence back in the day?
Oh, it was an awesome show. The data blast at the end was fantastic. And, we've had Andy Crane on the show, who was kind of the co-presenter. And I just think it's great that we've got Violet on, because it makes this kind of complete Bad Influence coverage, It's great.
And Violet was on, a lot of shows back then. I think she actually did the first mainstream gaming reviews on television on a show that she did called Cool Cube back in around 1989, I think that was. Then she went on to Whack-A-Day, that of course was a summer holiday institution for, all British kids back then. And then Bad Influence, that ran for, I think she was on it for about 3 or 4 years. There's 4 series of that show, and it was on every week around 4:30 in the afternoon when you got home from school. And it was an interesting show because it was kind of 50-50 split between the latest video games that came out, and they had kids that would do the reviews of the games. But also what I found interesting about Bad Influence is they also covered technology and computers on that show as well.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Andy Crane actually expressed in his interview how much of an interest he had in technology, but also Violet at that point got so kind of famous because she was meeting all these video game developers that she was included in quite a few games herself. So she was actually a choosable character in Micro Machines, and I remember one called Normality that she was in as well on the PC.
And there's one episode of Bad Influence I always remember. That's when she was one of the first Western journalists to go along to the Nintendo 64 launch, and they broadcast that, on Bad Influence, her first impressions. And that system that you remember, the N64 was hyped, and God, it was like, it's coming soon for about, 3 years. And then when we finally got to see it on TV, that was the first time I'd ever seen it. And you could tell because she's such a passionate gamer, her enthusiasm was kind of, what all us kids were feeling as well at the time. So we're going to get loads of memories about those amazing days and Bad Influence with Violet Berlin. She'll be on the Retro Hour podcast in around 15 minutes from now. So let's get into this big Sega announcement now. Last week on the show, we were talking about this Japanese gaming magazine called Famitsu. Now, there was a journalist from there who released a little statement saying that he had some groundbreaking Sega news that was going to rock the industry. And it was kind of on the scale of Sony's PlayStation 5 announcement. And there was 2 announcements this week. Now, let's start with the first one. We're going to get a mini Game Gear.
You see, I'm just going to say something before this. You guys were very optimistic. I was pessimistic. And I said Game Gear as well. So
you did, actually.
Sometimes it helps to be pessimistic. Yeah.
And I said, Ravi's always right. Like, he always kind of gets the things that he doesn't think it is right kind of thing, if that makes sense. And he's actually got it right this time. And yeah, me and Dan, we were so optimistic. But, talking about the Game Gear Mini, I think it's cool, and it's not going to be as expensive as I think people.
It's micro actually. Game Gear
Game
Micro.
Gear is a Game Gear Micro.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's cool. Would I play it if I bought it? Probably not. It'll probably just sit on the shelf in its box. And I really like that there is 4 variants and there's the 4 different colours. But what I don't like is that they all come with different games. I thought it would come with, like, you know, they would all come with the same games, like 20 games. But it's just each different colour gets 4 different games, which I think is interesting. And it kind of gives you a reason to buy all 4, but it might be a little bit of a cash grab as well.
Yeah, the hardware itself then. Let's talk about the actual physical Game Gear Micros then. This is literally tiny. It is 80 millimeters by 43 millimeters with a 1.15-inch display. And you were talking to me before we started recording. That's even smaller than the Game Boy Micro, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's got, is it a 1.5 inch or is it 1.15 inch?
1.15 it says here on this article on the Verge.
Oh my God, so it's literally an inch and a couple more millimeters wide.
A bit bigger than your thumbnail.
That's insane when you think about it. I mean, 8 centimeters wide as well. Like, that is really, really tiny. So I really don't feel like they're intending people are really going to like take this out with them on the bus and stuff and on long journeys to play. But what's quite cool is if you buy the 4-pack for all 4 of them, you do get the magnifying glass, like the screen magnifying glass that you can clip to it.
Which again, I mean, I remember being a kid and like the Game Boy had a magnifying glass. You know, even just to read that screen with this. I mean, I imagine these are collector's items because we're going to have 4 different ones on here. You've got like a red model, there's a yellow one, a blue one, and a black one. Like you said, they've all got different games. You know, the black one's got Sonic the Hedgehog, Puyo Puyo 2, Outrun, Royal Stone. That's probably my preferred list of games. The other ones have got like Sonic Chaos. You've got stuff like Shining Force games on the yellow one.
It's very Japanese. It's very Japanese based, isn't it? And it's only available in Japan.
Yeah, so there's been no news of it coming over here or into America or anything. But yeah, you're right, Ravi. They're really Japanese games as well.
And it's got a single mono speaker. It's got a headphone jack as well, which, you know, I think Apple and Samsung could learn a trick or two off Sega. You can still get a headphone jack even on a tiny little device like this. You can charge it over USB. The good news, though, for Game Gear fans is that now you can run it off 2 AAA batteries. And I imagine the battery probably won't die in like 2 hours like it used to.
I was interested because I thought, actually, if we look at the history of micro consoles, that Sega's done really badly because it had the At Games one for ages and ages and lots of third-party stuff. And then it finally released the nice Mega Drive, which people are using now. But they're still kind of dipping their toes into this area, aren't they? And I can imagine this being in that kind of region, there's going to be so many rip-offs of these made in China.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I'm just hoping now that the natural progression, now they've done the Mega Drive themselves, now they're doing the Game Gear themselves, natural progression's got to be that Saturn. Got to go get the Sega Saturn in 6 months' time.
You know what, though? You remember when we were talking about that like a year or so ago, and then we kind of came to the conclusion that probably the Saturn wasn't a big enough success for them to warrant doing that. But the fact that they're doing the Game Gear, which, you know, wasn't a big seller in any market really, probably does lead a bit more optimism that maybe they are going to do like a Saturn and a Dreamcast follow-up just for the fans maybe.
And the thing is, the Saturn did do really well in Japan. I only actually found out this week, and I never knew this, and I call myself a bloody retro gamer. The Saturn actually did better than the N64 in Japan.
Wow.
Which I never knew that. It did better numbers. Not worldwide, obviously. It got crushed worldwide. But in Japan, the Saturn was really supported. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do see a Saturn Micro, but Japan exclusive.
Yeah, so there's 4 Game Gear Micro consoles, and they're all available for pre-order now. I mean, the 4,980 yen, which I think works out at about $50 American, and they reckon these are going to be available by October the 6th. Like you said, Joe, there's no word on whether there's going to be a Western release of it yet. I mean, again, I think because it's Sega's 60th birthday, it's obviously a little kind of token gesture for the fans. The fact that it is playable, I mean, you know, this article here on The Verge as well says, you know, we're talking about the company that released a non-functional plastic Sega CD and a 32X for the Mega Drive Mini. So they are known just to put things out just to be like, you know, fun little items. The fact that you can actually play it, I can't imagine it's going to be the most comfortable thing to play. But have you got any interest in this, Joe? I mean, as a resident Sega fan, do you think you'd like a pack of these?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be available on Amazon, so I am going to check if I can actually get it delivered over here, and I think I will buy the red one.
Well, that wasn't the only Sega news, then. We did get another one that's kind of focused on the arcades, and according to the Metro, this was the big announcement then, Ravi.
Yeah, so this was called Sega Fog, and the idea is that you can take these Japanese arcade games and kind of play them at home, which kind of makes sense during the pandemic crisis at the moment, because I can't imagine arcades are going to be massively full of people. But to me, it's just another kind of cloud gaming service, another Stadia. And I've been using Stadia recently, actually, because it's free. And man, the selection of games is awful on that. And
is it laggy as well?
Bit of lag, bit of input lag if you're not using the Stadia controller. But that's free at the moment. And, you know, a lot of people were saying that was going to change the world. And now no one even knows that it's free. You know, so it's really interesting to see, how these cloud services go.
I feel like that's more disappointing than the Game Gear Micro. Like, if that's the actual big news, because of it's just like arcades are dead in the Western world. Like, they're just not a thing. Like,
but
so
in Japan,
I know
they're still very prevalent, aren't they?
Yeah, they are still very big in Japan. I went to the Sega arcade when I was over there. You know, and there was a lot of big Sega arcades and stuff, which was cool, and it was all fighting games and stuff. So I guess that's pretty cool to have. But at the same time, these are fighting games which are available on home console.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make an awful lot of sense to me to be able to be like, oh yeah, now I can play it at home kind of thing. So
especially if you're remotely playing an arcade machine, and I imagine you're probably still going to have to put like virtual money into it to play it if it's an arcade machine.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually.
They may monetize it somehow, yeah.
Yeah, they're gonna be like, or you could buy the game.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, back then when you played Virtua Fighter in the arcades, it didn't look as good at home. So there was a reason to play it on the arcades. But now you get it on the PlayStation 4 or something.
Yeah, I guess the only reason now to play it in the arcade is the atmosphere, because obviously there was a real atmosphere to it. And you can still smoke inside as well. So there was like that kind of like old school atmosphere, and it was like
that's probably why it's called Fog.
Yeah, probably. So, you know, and you're obviously going to completely lose that atmosphere if you're doing it at home. So I don't know, for a 60th anniversary as big as the PlayStation 5 announcement, it's a bit of a strange one for me.
And I guess it's also like Stadia is like you don't have the hardware, so you stream the game. So I guess it's like you might not have the powerful enough arcade hardware to run this, but you can still stream it onto your laptop or whatever.
Yeah, true.
I must admit, it doesn't really get me all that excited. I think, the days of kind of really wanting the arcade experience at home. I mean, in terms of retro arcades, absolutely, but modern arcades, it's like you said, they're not really that much different to playing home consoles these days. So if that was Sega's big announcement, because I mean, last week we were hearing the announcement was going to come on Thursday, the 4th of June, which is the day we're recording this. So you just watch, we'll finish recording it, then about half an hour they'll be like, Dreamcast 2's coming out.
Yeah, wouldn't that be amazing? I just want to note something as well. It really made me laugh. I saw somebody who I used to work with on Facebook going on about it last week, and he was just like, oh my God, Sega are doing a new announcement. Wouldn't it be amazing? And I commented on it, and I was like, oh, apparently it's, Microsoft might be purchasing them. Because that's what we thought it might be. And he was like, oh, wouldn't it be amazing if they did a follow-up console to the Mega Drive, like a Mega Drive 2? And I was just like, I'm not even going to talk to him.
You never guess what? I've got a Mega Drive 2. I've had it.
Yeah.
And
then like somebody else commented on it and was just like, a new Mega Drive would be amazing, and or like a follow-up. And I was just like, oh my days.
Don't associate with this guy anymore. Got him off.
They've just released an article on Ars Technica, and it's saying that the Japanese arcade streaming will also be used as data centers. So the fact that these machines aren't being used at the moment will kind of be able to use their power, but maybe they can mine some Atari tokens on there or something.
Well, let's move on to Atari then. I mean, obviously, if we do get any more big Sega news between now and next week's show, we'll let you know about it here on the podcast next week. The Atari VCS console, the new 2020 model, is now in the hands of the beta testers.
Yeah, so they've got a little program at the moment, which is kind of the Atari VCS VIP testers. And what they've actually done is they've sent out quite a few VCSs. So there are footage of people playing VCSs online, and they've kind of got them on YouTube. There's footage of just a few kind of standard games. Unsung Warriors is one at the moment. They've got a demonstration of people playing Ant Stream as well. So Sensible Soccer, I saw on there. A few other kind of older titles, but it just seems like they're playing the console, but they can't release that much about it at the moment, or really show the menu systems and stuff like that. But they can show the gameplay footage. They're also talking about a few accessories that are available as well, and these guys will be playing with the accessories. But it's still a little bit hush-hush, but there are kind of bits of footage coming out and, lots of leaks and stuff.
Hopefully we'll see a little bit more soon, because they're saying the first batch of 500 is being delivered, going out of the factory halfway through June. So surely we should start seeing a little bit more over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, so they're saying at the moment these videos are for demonstration purposes only, and they're not to be taken as like the official kind of release, but also they're going to release a full lineup of games soon, which is interesting. It's good to see that they've finally actually got there, guys.
Yeah, because it did have a lot of naysayers, a lot of doubters, so they've proved those people wrong.
Well, like me.
Yeah. I didn't want to remind everyone, Joe.
Same.
Now, it does seem like every week at the moment we're finding out about, a long-lost game that's suddenly resurfaced and the source code has been found. It seems there's a lot of old NES games getting found at the moment, and this one I thought was particularly interesting. A game from 1990 that was based on the Tom Cruise movie Days of Thunder has been found and restored from a bunch of old floppy disks.
Yeah, so I know a little bit about this one. So a guy called Chris Obeth, I think it was a programmer for Mindscape in 1990, and he passed away, sadly, a couple of years ago. And from what I understand, somebody was going through like his old belongings and stuff, and I think they found, 40 floppy disks or something?
Right.
Like that?
Yeah, around 50,
and
I think, yeah.
I think it was 50 floppy disks, and one of them was called Nintendo Hot Rod Taxi Final. So obviously, like, that's not, I don't think that is an actual NES game. So they've popped it in, and yeah, it's a lost game. It's the Days of Thunder game, and I'm not too sure what they've done with it. I think the Video Game History Foundation have now got it. It's just crazy. Like, I don't know what the story is behind it. Like, I don't know why it didn't come out or anything like that. I've never seen the film myself, so I don't know if it was the case where the film was a flop. So they just decided not to bring the game out, because sometimes back then the games would come out, a year or 6 months after the film would come out. So I don't really know what the story is behind that.
And especially when you got to 1990, it was kind of like, the 16-bit era was kind of coming in then as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not too sure what kind of happened there with it. But from far as I know, it's a fully functional game. Like, the game was finished.
Yeah, so what they did was they found split files on all of these disks, and they were all encrypted as well. So they managed to decrypt them. I don't know how, maybe brute force decryption or something. And then they managed to extract it, put all these split files together, and it was a total new game. But they've also said they're going to eventually publish the source code, which is really interesting, and they'll make a ROM available for everybody to play as well, which is fantastic, yeah. And they've got the permission of his family to actually release that.
It does make you wonder, like, kind of how many other finished games are just kind of lying around on hard disks or old floppy disks in attics or drawers and stuff like that. There's going to be so many of them still in the hands of developers. Even when they're still alive, we talk to a lot of people who, there was games that we were so incredibly hyped for as kids that never saw the light of day. And then we often have the programmers on the show and we're like, have you still got a copy of that? And they're like, oh yeah, there might be a copy of it up in the attic, like the only surviving copy in the world. It might be up there on an old disc. I haven't bothered to back it up. Often they don't really see the value in it, but obviously the fans, when we find out about something like this, it's like, like gold dust.
Yeah, and I guess sometimes as well with like you say, like they don't see the value in it. Sometimes I can imagine they don't want to get their wrists slapped by the companies that own it and stuff like that. So I guess it's difficult, but it's cool when it's like old enough for nobody to really like be bothered about it. Any bigwigs be bothered about it, I guess. Yeah, I can't imagine like
Tom Cruise is going to take it down.
Tom Cruise is going to take it upon himself to sue the people who release it.
Tom Cruise on one side, Nintendo on the other. Yeah, you wouldn't be that. Now, before we chat to the amazing Violet Berlin, let's give a huge thank you to this week's supporter, our very good friends at Beer 52. Now, summer is finally here, guys. I know today it's actually looking a bit cold and wet outside. It is British summer. But apparently the heat wave is going to be back here next weekend. Is there anything better, even though we're on lockdown at the moment, than sitting in the garden, maybe with your Nintendo Switch in your hand, or if you're Joe, your Atari Lynx, and a good beer in the sunshine? It doesn't get better than that, does it?
No, it doesn't, especially when it's Beer 52 beers and they're sending you amazing beers like raspberry milkshake and stuff like that.
Well, I've actually got the latest Beer 52 box here. I'm looking through some of the things we've got in this month. Salted caramel and chocolate and milk stout. Which sounds really interesting, that one. We've got a few fruit beers as well. We've got Old Engine Oil, Black Ale. There's a real selection in these. Now, the idea is Beer 52, they're the world's most popular craft beer discovery club, and they've got over 150,000 members. And what they do is they send you a brand new case every month, and each month has got a different theme. I mean, over like the last few months, it's been like New Zealand, South Africa, USA, European boxes, Korean box of beer they had recently too. And we want you to try them out for yourself. Each case is delivered direct to your doorstep. No need to leave the house. If you want to get stocked up, now's your chance to do it. So we want to give you a free case of 8 craft beers, sourced and curated from the best breweries on the planet. All you have to do is tap this into your browser right now. Claim this offer quick while it's on. beer52.com/retro. All you have to do is cover the £5.95 for postage. And of course, in the box, you also get a snack. This month, we've got smoked barbecue corn. That sounds really nice. And also you get the Ferment magazine as well, which is actually a magazine they put in there that's really interesting. You don't realise how interesting beer is until you start looking through it. It's really good. And of course, with Beer 52, you can customise it as well. Like, if dark beer is not your thing. I know, Ravi, you're quite into your pale ales, aren't you? Your lighter drinks?
Oh, yeah. I love it. It's like, ooh, what beer am I going to try tonight?
Yes, you can choose a light option if that's your flavour. And of course, with it, you can pause or cancel your account at any time if you change your mind. We just want you to give it a try. So do this right now. Your first case of 8 beers for £5.95 postage only on us. And you'll be helping out the podcast by doing it. beer52.com/retro. And also a good time to give a big shout to our favourite people in the world, our incredible patrons. Now, I can't believe it's been almost a month since our last patrons hangout. We're going to do one again next Sunday. So we're getting ready for that. This is where we all just get together. We get a load of us on Google Meetups and we just essentially chat about retro games. I'll be cracking open a Beer 52 and showing off a few of our recent gets. Because I've actually got my hands on the Atari Jaguar Flashcart this week.
Ooh.
So Beer 52 and the Atari Jaguar Flashcart, that is my plan for the weekend coming up. So I know I'll be talking about that on the stream next week. I've got to give a big thank you actually
to... I'll get some CPUs out or something like that.
Yeah, Ravi's always got one of them within arm's reach. A big shout as well to James from Retro HQ. He's a listener to the podcast, and he's the one that sorted me out with the Atari Jaguar Flashcart. So thank you very much for that. And let's give a huge thank you to this week's supporters. We'll try and get through as many as we can. Thank you to our good friend Retro Hammer,
Tony Orr,
Ross McPhee,
Peter Geoffrey,
and Darren Lomax,
who all made donations into the running of the show by supporting us on Patreon. And if you'd like to do the same, of course, you'll get a shout in a future episode of the podcast. We've got loads of different tiers as well, and we would love you to join us next Sunday evening for our Patrons Hangout happening on Sunday, the 14th of June. At around 8 p.m. we normally do it, so all the links will be on our Patreon page. It'd be lovely to see you there. Right then, let's get into this week's special guest, getting the backstory on the legendary Bad Influence with Violet Berlin. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it's time to welcome on this week's very special guest. Now, we are so excited about the guest that we've got this week. You know, speaking as someone who, as a kid, religiously watched Bad Influence every week, usually around my grandma's at tea time, love that show, and it is a pleasure to welcome to the Retro Hour podcast the fantastic Violet Berlin. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Now, before we get into stories of your time on Bad Influence, hopefully you can remember about it. I know it was a while ago now, but I thought it might be nice just to kind of get a bit of a background on your kind of history with video games and computers. What kind of started your interest in it then? Do you remember?
Well, I can't remember a time when I wasn't interested in computers, really. You know, anything that was sort of sci-fi or technological. I was, I think, one of 3 girls in my year at school who chose the option to do computer science, which, you know, nowadays would be mad. But also, to put it in context, back then you had the option of, you know, home economics, computer science, woodwork. And, you know, there was one computer between the entire class, and we had to wait in turns. And I think I got on it once in the entire year. But yeah, it just captivated my interest. And I remember I was absolutely dying to get on that computer. And when I got on it, I sat there and there was that blinking cursor, and I just typed, hello, can you hear me? I obviously hadn't listened in class to what computers really were or what they did, but it had always been something that I thought was a bit magical.
Well, what was your first system that you got at home?
I didn't actually until I was 21. So the first game I played was a calculator game. That we had this calculator, and you could play music on it, and you could play this sort of kind of space invaders game, numbers invaders game, where the numbers came up. It was brilliant. The numbers came up, and you had to tap the keys, and you had to match, over and over again to match the number that was coming towards you. And I became brilliant at that and became completely obsessed with it. And I think from memory, I probably got to a point where I could just keep going, and there was like no end, and I could just keep going and going and going, and it never, I had to make a decision to stop playing because it couldn't defeat me.
You'd still be playing it now otherwise.
Exactly. Another version of me still is. And we didn't have computers at home. I didn't even have a TV at home growing up. So I didn't actually even get a TV until I started working in television. And I didn't get a video game console until the third show in TV, where a guy in my production office, we'd all come together to make this new TV show called Core Cube. And the guy said, we're doing this kids live TV show. My nephews play, this Nintendo, this NES system a lot. We should do reviews on it. Now, I was the presenter on that show who sort of, kind of did my own research and I was more of a writer and researcher and presenter. The other presenters would come and sort of read other people's scripts. So I was kind of more embedded in the show. So they said, Violet, why don't you do this? You can take it home and you can work out what these, computer games are and kind of like work out what to say about them and who, what kids to get in and all the rest of it. So it's like my responsibility. And so I was given this kind of grey box, the NES, and took it home and plugged it in, and I was just completely besotted with it. And that year, I was working so hard on that show. It was like 2 live shows a week, and I was like run ragged, kind of behind the scenes, writing it and presenting it and all the rest of it. And the only time I really relaxed was when I was playing Castlevania.
Amazing. Well, it's quite interesting that you said then you didn't have a TV growing up. What made you want to get into television and journalism then?
Well, it wasn't ever really my aim directly. I was completely obsessed with stories growing up, which is hardly surprising when you consider I didn't have a TV or a computer or anything like that. And I read a lot, and I was obsessed. I was completely obsessed with Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. And so I ended up going to university to study English language and Anglo-Saxon and Old Norse. That's basically the subjects that Tolkien taught at university. And I managed to get a course where I was taught by the people that Tolkien taught. So that's how obsessed I was with Lord of the Rings. And I sort of thought that if I could get to the absolute root of the earliest stories and myths and understand what a story was, that would help me to write my own stories and help me to kind of understand the best way of storytelling. That was my sort of driver, if you like. And then when but I didn't, when you're at university, you don't really think like that. That's why I went there. But then I just sort of went through university without going to a single careers fair or thinking ahead in any way, shape or form. And then it got to the end of university and people started saying, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I sort of was like, well, I guess I want to be a writer and I want to sort of write stories. And I want to write children's stories because I decided by then, I was really into kind of young adult fiction and children's stories. And I said, well, the sensible thing to do, I guess, is I should get to know my audience a bit better. So maybe I should get a job in children's television, and then I could be around kids and kind of understand what they like and kind of create stuff for them, maybe dramas, that sort of thing. And then from then, after I've had a bit of experience of that, maybe that will help me with my book career. That's kind of how 18-year-old Violet was thinking. Any sort of normal person looking back, you realise that is completely pie in the sky idea. What do you mean my second choice of career is in television? I'll just go and get a job in television. That's a simple thing to do. But again, and you know what life has taught me is that sometimes, like, if you don't realise there are barriers, you can walk through them. Because I, like, completely naively, like, wrote off to some TV companies, never having had a TV or particularly watched TV. Went to the interview. I think the guy was quite. Actually, I went to the interview dressed as Batgirl. That's how out of it I was. Like, not even dressed, like not in a kind. You're probably imagining some kind of, like, fancy dress costume, Batgirl. No, dressed as my own interpretation of Batgirl, like, with kind of like this kind of like this image in my head. I was completely out there, but actually, I guess it worked, because essentially he said that he liked my ideas. He was asking me for ideas, and I'd never watched really a live kids show or any kind of kids show. The interview was for a show called Wide Awake Club, WAC 90. And I just sort of came out with these ideas, and I guess they must have been really original because I hadn't watched TV, so no one else had done them. And then he asked me to do a bit of writing, and then I got the job. And so that's how I ended up in television.
And your first appearance was on there with Carol Vorderman as well, right?
Oh, so that was because on Wide Awake Club, you know, I started off doing the kids' news, and then sort of used to write little comedy sketches. You know, when the brilliant thing about kids' TV is, or certainly magazine shows, is that you get to do a bit of everything. You know, you might do a bit of news, or you might do a bit of comedy, or you might do a bit of, kind of like an animal thing about a bat, something about, like technology, whatever it might be. And one thing I was tasked to do was to write. I used to write for Carol Vorderman's, had a slot on WAC 90, where it used to be called something like Carol's Lab, and she'd do experiments in science. And so I wrote myself into a sketch. I didn't really. We had this thing about germs, and all these kids had to come on and be germs and hold up signs of germs. And because I would look quite young, I look very young, and I was the smallest person there, they wanted someone to lead the children as the germs. So I kind of had to dress up as a kid, or just come on as myself. And I was a kid, really. And be a germ on one of Carol's items. That was my first thing. My second appearance was when, after that, I started working for Whack-A-Day, Timmy Mallet's Whack-A-Day, and I used to write all of that and be behind the scenes and find all the Mallet kids and all that sort of stuff. And I came up with this idea for a slot on the show where he read the letters, and instead of and the way he would get the letters was his post box came on, and the post box would give him the letters through its slot, sort of thing. Yeah. But then we needed someone to be the post box, so that was me as well.
A germ and a post box, your first appearances.
Exactly. But do you know what? I can remember, the weird thing about doing that, and the excitement of live TV. It's so exciting. The cameras and the lights, and suddenly you realise you are going out live, and it makes you feel weird. As soon as it's kind of, you look at the red light, it makes you feel weird. And I think it was interesting that I got that experience from inside a post box. You're just standing there on live TV, but you're like, no one can see you. It's quite a weird feeling, but it gives you this kind of sense, or it kind of acclimatizes you in a way to that kind of, that mood, that feeling, that environment. And I do happen to think that a lot of TV and radio presenting, not all of it, obviously, but a significant proportion of it, is kind of being acclimatized to the environment. And I think that anyone who does, and you can tell this because so many people do their own podcasts and TV shows and all sorts on the internet and Twitter. Back then, we thought it was some sort of magical thing that, if you went on telly, you were a person who went on telly. But actually, it's kind of it's access to the technology and the means, and then it's fine. But it was a bit of a revelation to me.
And it's hard to describe to people, like, maybe you're not from the UK, but just what a big deal, Whack-A-Day was. I mean, that was religious viewing in the school summer holidays. Everyone watched it, and it was a massive show. And it always looked, that energy kind of came across as well watching it. It looked like it was loads of fun to work on.
It was hectic to work on. I mean, the thing is that people always think that, TV there's loads of money in TV. And there is, I think, but not in kids' TV. And there never really has been. Kids' TV has always been like the baby brother, the baby sister of grown-up TV, and doesn't get the money in ad revenues. And so essentially, Whackaday, the period that Whackaday was on, it was Timmy Malek presenting, me doing everything behind the scenes, making the gunge at 9 o'clock at night, whatever is required for a kids' TV show, looking up the gunge recipe first because no one tells you, and a producer basically, and that was it. So every morning, religiously live, and I used to have nightmares about, that I'd missed the show because if you get the bus late for work, you've like missed it sort of thing, or So it was an adventure.
Well, where did the idea of Bad Influence come from then, and how did you get involved?
So at the point of Whackaday, I hadn't really, played any games or anything yet, but I'd sort of cut my teeth on television. And to talk about Bad Influence, really, we need to sort of rewind a little bit to talk about Core Cube, which I think I just mentioned with the cast, that I said that this is a show called Core Cube, and I started playing, I got an NES. But basically, from playing that NES, I became completely obsessed with video games, and I loved them. And did live reviews of games with kids every week, twice a week actually, for about a year. And as you can imagine, this made me something of an aficionado. And after the NES, we got in all the other systems, and I got right across it. And incidentally, they were the first games, regular games coverage on UK TV. And they were really popular. And then after Core Cube finished, I went off to do a BBC One show called Wild Bunch, which is a wild animals show. And I did that for a series. And, it was fine, but it wasn't quite me. And after that, suddenly, the series ended and suddenly everything was quiet. I had nothing on whatsoever. And I was living in London. And you know what it's like in London if you've got no work. And, you're in a busy city, you've got no work, you've got no money, you can't go out, there's nothing happening. And I used this time to but I did have all these consoles from the Core Cube days. So I was playing all these games and everything, and I just decided that I'd really love to, do more with games or do a game show. And I actually applied for a couple of game shows, but I didn't get. And meanwhile, bought myself a computer and became the person that all my friends knew was the person who knew about computers and games. That was it. And then one of them heard about a show, Bad Influence, that was being considered up in Yorkshire TV that was going to cover games and computers. And they immediately thought of me. I got in touch with a guy there called Richard Maud. And I said, look, I don't mind I'd love to work on this show. I don't mind what I do. I'm happy to, research. I'm happy to find the games. I'm happy to present the show. I can do any of this. And I didn't really expect much to come of it. And in fact, me and my boyfriend of the time, who moved to Manchester by this point, we were sort of running out of money, and we decided to go on a sort of 3-month tour around Eastern Europe to spend the last of the money that we had, our savings, and then come back and get sensible jobs. That's what we decided to do. And Richard Maud sort of messaged me and said, come in and see me at Yorkshire TV. And I said, I'm about to go away, but I'll come and see you. So on the day that I was due to go around Eastern Europe in this old car, we loaded up the car, we drove to Yorkshire TV. My boyfriend waited for me in the Ford. I went to the bar with Richard Maud and had a chat about my interest in games and computers and all the rest of it, and that I'd do anything on the show if they wanted it. Then I got back in the car, we went off, we had the whole adventure around Eastern Europe. We came back ready to open the papers and look for typing jobs or whatever it was that we could get, because I decided that I wasn't really going to get another TV job again. And I got a call from Yorkshire TV saying, will you come in? We want you to come and work on the show. Will you come in? So I was like, yeah, but they hadn't told me what my job was. So I just assumed that my job would be to, find the games or whatever. I mean, I wasn't unhappy with that. I was delighted with that. I mean, I thought I was going to get free games. Games would cost a fortune. I'd been playing the same few games I managed to save from the days of Core Cube over and over and over again. We'd like lent the console to my sister so that she'd be lured into buying Mega Man 2 so that we could go and play it over at her house. These were the dire straits we were in. And, games were like 40 or 50 quid. They were like an investment, weren't they? So I was like jumping around for joy at the free games and the work, so I wouldn't have to go and do typing or whatever. I went over there, and they said, oh, it's like this lunch, this production lunch. And there was me and Andy Crane and, all the people on there. Like, aha. And literally over lunch, somebody mentioned, I think it might have been the guy who ran the show, and I knew and our presenters, Violet and Andy, and that was when I knew that I was presenting it.
No way.
Well, the name Bad Influence itself is very much kind of talking about the parents' attitude at the time and the attitude of the press. Was the idea of the show to kind of change this attitude and maybe present games in a different light?
Yeah, and I think like Richard Moore, this guy that I met when I first went for the interview. I mean, he explained. I think could be wrong, but I think Bad Influence might have been his idea, or certainly he told me about it. And it was this idea. I guess it was a double pun on bad meaning good and everything, but that they firmly didn't believe that games were a bad influence. But they also saw this as it was a Julia Tomorrow's World was the way it was seen, but the way in being through games. And yeah, no one on that show, they were kind of like basically technophiles and they wanted to make good, entertaining, factual shows for kids. That was it really. And it was Richard Moore, incidentally, who I think that it was his idea for Data Blast as well. The Data Blast at the end of the show, where they would put up like pages and pages and pages of information over the closing credits, and then people would have to video it with their VHS machines and then rewind, and then you could pause and unpause and read all these, like, it's early internet individual pages of information.
And a free magazine, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And I tell you what, I don't think they quite realised how much work it would be to put it together, because you made an entire TV show and then you have to create every week like 40 pages of cheats or, But yeah, no, I think that was him as well. But it was a great team at Bad Influence, really, really fantastic.
Did you see yourselves in competition with Games Master, or was it a completely different audience?
We were aware that other people saw us, or some other people, maybe the games magazines and so forth, might have seen us in competition with Games Master. It was a totally separate, because our competition were other kids' TV shows that were going on at the same time. We never specifically saw ourselves as a game show. We were a factual entertainment show for kids. Another, I think, really key thing was that, we went out on children's ITV, we had 5 million viewers a week, which, when I say it now, it's hard. I know that people go on YouTube and might get 20 billion for one stream or something internationally. But now, media is so fragmented nowadays that it's hard to imagine, 5 million people at the same time as for a live event, as it were, just sitting and watching one thing. And so that's something that everyone's talking about, isn't it? So the point I'm trying to make here is that we were broadcasting in the truest sense of it. So we were trying to reach the absolute widest audience. And part of that remit, an absolutely crucial part of that remit, was that we had to get half and half boys and girls. So, and we did for the first few series, we did. And everyone was really, really pleased with that, because they weren't absolutely convinced, computers and games and all the rest of it, considering the context of the era when it was mostly boys who were playing games or who were perceived to be playing games. But Games Master was in a kind of a youth slot. It seemed to be mostly aimed at boys, teenage boys. So it's a different age, different slot, different time. It was very much sort of a game show, a games entertainment show. So yeah, so we were very, very different shows. And I mean, I guess there was a little bit of, I guess, a sense that maybe we weren't as cool as Games Master or whatever, because, we weren't. But I guess we also were able to get some really, when you look back at it, you see the solid journalism and you see the real insights into the games industry which we managed to. So we did what we did really well, and they did what they did really well. I think that's the message there. Yeah.
And I think, you mentioned then about the fact that you covered technology as well as just gaming. And, that really interested me as a kid. I mean, I vividly remember an episode where you were at like a big music concert and you were showing kind of how all the lighting rig and the sound equipment worked. And there's one where you planned like a fireworks display that I remember as well. And Silicon Graphics workstations on the show. So, I mean, it was actually, like you said, a 50-50 split between gaming and technology. Was that a decision from the outset then to cover tech as well as gaming?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's brilliant. I'm so pleased you remember all of those things. That I'm so pleased about that. The fireworks, I think, might have actually been a proper live show.
Yeah.
That we did. We might have done that actually out live. I've got a vague feeling. And Jean-Michel Jarre was the big music concert that I went to, and we covered things like early morphing. The funniest one, I think, looking back, it's hard to say which one's quite the funniest one, with hindsight, is when I was in San Francisco and we did this thing about GPS and how GPS might work in the future. And I met this blind girl, and the university had come up with this way of using GPS to help you navigate an environment, so that she'd put on headphones and it would sort of say the cafe is to your left, and she would basically be given voice directions. And we were sort of saying how marvelous this all is. And this poor little, sort of teenage girl, she had this giant backpack for all the GPS equipment, these huge headphones, it was, and there's me reporting on it. And of course now not many years later, we all had it on our phones.
Yeah.
Well, that was a really big thing as well when you went out to America, and we could kind of, see you in America, and going over to America then was a real big deal. And it was like going to another world, especially when you were talking to Dave Perry and stuff about the new Earthworm Jim title.
I love it that you remember all this. It's brilliant. Shared history. Yeah, can I tell you the thing that most sticks in my mind when I think about interviewing Dave Perry about Earthworm Jim? This is my embarrassing story. We went to the beach to do some part of the filming, and we had to leave his office, and we went to the beach, and I was a bit in awe. This was like, he's very tall American Dave Perry, and his who was all the rage about Earthworm Jim. And it was a really busy road, and the cars were going in the wrong direction, of course, because it's America. I mean, the right direction for America, the wrong direction for me. And we went to cross the road, and without even thinking, I put out my hand and held his hand like he was my dad to cross the road. I must have thought I was mad, or propositioning him. I don't know.
Did he say anything, or was it just like, yeah, let's not mention that?
I don't think he did. I think I just probably just pretended it was, these things, you just move on, don't you?
Well, I love the stuff that you did in America, because, we'll get onto your kind of virtual Violet days soon, but also, in the early episodes, there was Z Wright from America who did like a report every week about what was happening stateside. And like Ravi said, it felt like, you were seeing into like another world that because the world felt a lot bigger back then, kind of pre-internet. Where did the idea of getting him to do the reports and stuff come from then?
That was Patrick Titley, who was the executive producer of the programme. And I remember he had just decided, I think, from early days that he wanted to have American reports and that he would just get an American reporter. I don't know why, maybe because it was cool, or maybe partly because it might be, you fly out there and your presenter's already there. I don't know, but maybe kind of our man on the spot he thought would be good. And I know Z Wright was an actor. I think they did some casting and they looked at a few, and I've got a vague memory of Patrick saying that they were actually looking for a woman, and she sent her show reel in, and Z Wright was also in the same show, and they preferred Z, so they got him on. But but we didn't really have much contact with Z. We saw his reports, and that was it. He was an actor, and the film crew would fly out there and in the summer with Patrick and do a bunch of films, and then they'd come back and then we'd introduce, and that was about the extent of link we had. Unlike the other contributor to the show, Nam Rood, the Cheats guy, Andy Weir, he was very much, in the studio, and he came up and did the filming every week with us and stayed over in the same hotel. And me and Andy Weir went out drinking every night for the entire run of the show.
He was a great character as well, Namrood. I loved him.
Yeah, he was. He was a fantastic character, and Patrick used to always joke about how he was in the I think the Royal Shakespeare Company or something. It was a Shakespearean he'd done proper Shakespearean acting before he was Namrood. And incidentally, since he was Namrood, he's been in Emmerdale and Coronation Street. I think he's the only. Fact fans, Andy Weir, I think, might be the only actor to have been in both all the live soap. The soaps, the soap operas have like live episodes every now and again. He's been in all, one for each of them. Coronation Street and Emmerdale, maybe even EastEnders. I don't know, but yeah, he's a proper actor. We used to always joke about how he's a proper actor, and he's like doing our show.
He's saying scrotty fertilers and all that. Is that
exactly? Yeah. And he shaved his head for the show as well, which we all thought was very admirable.
And it remind me of kind of the characters that you get in like Crystal Maze or one of these kind of adventure shows,
Yeah. He was actually, he came from the script was all written by Patrick, the exec producer. But Andy turned up, having shaved his head for the role. That all came from Andy and developed that character. And yeah, really, he's one of the first things people always mention about the show when they speak to me. So he obviously made a massive impression.
When Bad Influence started, it was the Mega Drive and SNES. They were the new consoles. And then by the end of it, it was the PlayStation and N64. So did you feel like it was a real rapid change in time?
Do you know what? I kind of didn't feel it at the time. It just felt normal. Like, it felt like, things were moving on. I guess when you're reporting on tech the whole time, and, I was so across, games. I had a pile of Mega Drive games that reached the ceiling in my house. And, we would used to joke, when's it going to reach the ceiling? And it did, the SNES games less so, because, the Mega Drive published anything, didn't it? Let's be honest. And at the same time, like my Mega Drive got more and more attachments of Mega CDs and 32Xs and this, the Mega Drive itself got higher and higher. And, but it felt like, there was something coming out every week, every month, but that was fine because I was doing so much journalism at that time, as well as presenting Bad Influence. I wrote a syndicated newspaper column that went out all over the country to regional newspapers all over the country. That were my game reviews, and I was writing, game reviews for the Observer magazine, and I was doing reviews on BBC Radio, game reviews on Radio 5, and I think towards the end of it, I became the internet correspondent on Woman's Hour, and and I was making my own games, TV shows for the children's channel, and so on and so forth. So it was like the throughput was very welcome, because it's like you always have to have new things to say, and you want to say new things, and there's new stuff going on. And so honestly, I think it's kind of one of those things where I was so busy and there was so much going on that when that's happening, you don't really sort of pause to think, gosh, this is happening really quickly, do you? So to me, that 3 years, a period of something like 3 years, I sort of think of it like a degree, because a degree, if you study a degree, it's 3 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like when you look back to studying your degree, you don't think, do you think it, loads changes when you do a degree, first year, second year, third year, and you pop out the other end, kind of an expert on your subject sort of thing. If you say you do English, you've like covered everything, haven't you? So that's how I think of it. It was like my degree in games, television.
Well, I mean, Rav, you mentioned the N64 then as well, and that's one memory I've got that really stands out about Bad Influence. The fact that kind of few years that it was on, it was always like we knew about the PlayStation and we knew about the Jaguar, and it was always like the Ultra 64's coming soon, and it was delayed for ages. But you actually went to the launch of it, I remember, in Japan, and that was such a big deal watching it. I mean, it must have been incredible to be there.
Yeah, and I guess in some ways this was the highlight of Bad Influence for me, and so I'm really glad you've picked it up. And it's so rewarding when you get these stories back, so thank you. It's so rewarding to get these stories back, to kind of understand that there were other people along there on the journey with you, because you don't necessarily get a sense of that at the time. I mean, within Bad Influence, I was the games player, so when I realised, in hindsight, when I look back, I was like, oh, I don't know if I'll get this job. they were TV show makers, but to find someone who was across games and TV, because I just had like a year play, because I'd had this deep introduction to all the different consoles and games through the previous TV show I'd done, which I would have loved to have done anyway, but most people wouldn't have been able to afford to do that. So I was just fortuitous that I'd got onto that TV show and I'd had the means to play all these different games. So that's what gave me my start, So because of my kind of knowledge and history and, all the things I was doing to do with games, I was the real gamer at on Bad Influence. I mean, obviously there were researchers and so forth as well who loved games, and they were always playing Doom behind the scenes, like, why haven't you done any research? Oh, we're all linked up on Doom. That was the final series. But I was such a dyed-in-the-wool gamer, and like I was out there in Japan, to be there at the launch of the Ultra 64 felt like, it felt like a door opening. It really did. It felt like a door opening into a new era of gaming, a new era of computers, everything, because it was 3D and it was just so, the way Nintendo had thought it through, it was so different. And they had Mario and they had Zelda, the new Zelda. So it was everything you could, for me, it was everything you could want as a gamer. But you didn't ever, because we didn't have, obviously Twitter and social media and emails and all the rest back then. You did it, but you didn't get the feedback at all. You just did it, and you just trusted that, everyone else was, as pleased as you were. But so it's great to hear those stories coming back. It was incredible. I think we were the only Western journalists there.
Well, what did the gaming industry think of the show then? Did you have like a lot of involvement with industry?
What do you think?
Well, I'd have thought you'd have kind of been like there with magazines as well, kind of viewed the same and invited to the launch events. And I was quite curious as to how
no,
they kind
not
of viewed
really.
it.
No, I'm interested because no, not really. I would say not really.
Right.
So it's a funny. It was a funny thing. So back then, that the games magazines reigned supreme, or that's how it seemed to us in terms of a lot of things, because that's how the games PR machinery worked. And I think Games Master seemed to be very much in that clique because they had all the games journalists on their show. And they were like, their target audience was like the same target audience as the games magazines. And so I think it came across to me, certainly, that the games kind of, the whole PR machinery and the games companies were more interested in getting that, 80% or 90% in mega, I can't remember what they were called now, super play. I like super play. Or whatever, than they were in having a, feature on Bad. That's how it seemed to me. I mean, we did, we got, the Bad Influence got stuff from, got some good scoops and everything, but it wasn't, nobody was ringing up, bowing down, can we, giving us special treatment is what I would say. If anything, it always felt to me like the games magazines got the special treatment. So, and when I got invited, like I used to get invited to sort of launches and parties, and I've got, a few happy tales of that, and I used to get sent games and so forth. But I always felt that was because of my regional newspaper column, my syndicated regional newspaper column. I felt they were more interested in, or my, I would write for Digitizer, and I'd write for, although actually they weren't that interested in Digitizer either. I'd occasionally write for games magazines, or like I did a couple of things for CTW, the trade mag, that sort of thing. So they were kind of more interested in the introverted sort of, sort of magazines and specific games media than the broadcasting element of going out to people who might not be quite such avid gamers. So it could be. I mean, obviously, like there was some brilliant, made some great friends and some great PRs, and went to some stuff, but you basically always felt a little bit on the outside of that clique.
Which is a bit crazy because you think none of the magazines had the circulation that you had in viewers. I mean, there's no magazines were getting 5 million readers.
Yeah, it is. I mean, yeah, it is a bit crazy, but I guess from their perspective, I think it's about how sometimes these systems are set up that, if getting your say 90% in Superplay or whatever, I don't know why I'm choosing Superplay, in one of the magazines would, was very tangible, and you could probably have a printout. I've really thought about this, you can tell. You can probably have a printout of it. And also they all seem to be, I think, cliques feed cliques, don't they? So it was all kind of very insular, and maybe the games shops and the people that they wanted to stock their games maybe read these magazines. This is what I've been trying to think. Whereas the broader picture, I think in general, the broader picture of the broader audience back then just wasn't a thing. It was new. It was new that we were featuring games on TV. I mean, you always got the impression they'd rather, or not always, but sometimes got the impression they'd rather be on something like Games Master, because that was more aimed at the sort of games magazine-y type audience. And obviously some of them really saw the big picture of it kind of going out to 5 million people and how broad all that was, and how it was broadening it out. But it really wasn't until the PlayStation 1 came out and Sony was so successful in popularising video games to a wider audience. It wasn't until then that really any of the games, or most of the games industry, seemed to realise that they could be looking a bit wider than their sort of traditional sort of geeky, nerdy sort of demographic that they had always aimed at.
Well, you always had the kids on the show reviewing games, and they always seemed a little bit younger than the Games Master audience. How did you go about finding these kids and picking the ones to actually review?
Well, there was a wonderful woman called Susan who worked on the show, and that was her. She was a producer, and that was her department. I'm not quite sure how she found them. I think she went to local schools and sort of looked around. They were all from, local nearby in Leeds, and she probably, I would imagine, she probably like auditioned them. Found kids who like games, tried to find a balance of different games. Just sort of almost like casting, but they were all normal kids who went to schools around Leeds, and in fact a couple of them I'm still in touch with. So Sir Hale, I don't know if you remember Sir Hale.
Yes, yeah.
He's now some really big shot executive producer in television.
Oh, amazing.
on light entertainment shows, yeah. So and they were, it was good to see. And the kids who came in the studio, they just found them, in audiences around different schools that would come in. So, but they used to do record the children's reviews before we did the main show, and then slot those bits in. So we'd sort of hang around with them a bit beforehand, and watch their verdicts on the different games, and they were a good mix. I mean, I can never forget being quite so surprised as one little girl I saw come in to do some reviews, and she was so rabidly into beat 'em ups, and at the time that was quite shocking.
Well, you also hosted the spin-off show Bad Level 10 as well. That, if memory serves, that was that filmed in an arcade?
Yes,
yeah,
it
tell us
was.
about that.
Did you see that? Did you watch that?
I do remember seeing a couple of episodes of it.
So was that on Children's Channel?
It was definitely on Sky, wasn't it?
I can't remember.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I think it was on the Children's Channel, but I can't remember. Isn't that awful? No, maybe it was. It may not.
A Children's Channel, yeah.
Was it definitely on the Children's Channel? Okay, so Bad Level 10. That was just a spin-off show in a local arcade in Leeds, and that was just me and Steve. Researched it. Steve was a researcher on Bad Influence. He was a researcher on Bad Influence who came from the magazine CVG, who I'd met and asked to join the show when I met him on a press trip to Asterix World for the Asterix game. And that was just three of us, really. That was Colin, the director, me presenting, Steve researching. I'm trying to remember. There was a runner as well, maybe Adam. But that was much, much tinier. That was a much, much smaller outfit, if you like, and we just got there and just had a lot. It was more like looser, and obviously commensurate to budgets for the Children's Channel. But at the time, I think I was probably doing a lot of other shows on the Children's Channel, possibly because I did a whole bunch. Like I did Head to Head on the Children's Channel. That was through my TV company, and that was. Did you ever see Head to Head?
No, I don't think I saw that one.
You missed a treat. That's the one. That's where when I met Guru Larry.
Right. He's told me about it. I think I've seen the clip on YouTube.
Yeah, he was a contestant. So that was the brainchild of this guy called Rob Hart, who then went on to work for Virgin Games in LA. But he was a director at the Children's Channel, and I came to him with this idea for a game, I just said, games are so brilliant. They have these brilliant 2-player modes. Let's just have a competition where you kind of play each other at a game, say Mario Kart, winner stays on every day, winner stays on. After 10 shows, you get a prize if you've done it, whatever. Really simple, 5-minute shows, just little 5-minute shows that they dot into the channel. Little breaths, really. It was his idea to have that giant brain. So they'd be playing a game across that giant brain, and they'd win brain trophies. And then this other director came along and decided to make it in 3D. So we did head-to-head in 3D. And in order to make it 3D, he investigated all the different ways of making 3D shows. And he was inspired by the Kama Sutra in 3D,
wow.
in which a couple, apparently, was on this giant bed, that's a spinning bed, because, it was this sort of 3D where, a bit like parallax, I guess, in a way, where if you've got sort of movement at different speeds, it can appear to give depth. So we put the contestants on this giant turntable with this and playing in the consoles set in this giant brain, playing across, the giant brain to each other on this giant spinning turntable for head-to-head in 3D. The days. And then I made Cheat Flash for the Children's Channel, which was and the A to Z and Z to A of video games. So there's a whole bunch of stuff I did for the Children's Channel, which was really, really a laugh, because unlike Bad Influence, which was going out to 5 million people, this was basically, kind of low budget satellite TV that hardly anyone watched. So you could just, mess about basically. And there was no one watching to stop you.
So you were actually included in Micro Machines 2 as a character. How did you get involved? And that must have been fun.
Yeah, it's brilliant to be in Micro Machines 2. The best thing about it is that, when you agree to do something like that, you can't possibly know if the game's going to be any good or not, really. So, imagine if in the first or second series they'd asked me to be in Rise of the Robots. I would have been like, so Micro Machines 2, we all knew Micro Machines was a good game. So it seemed like a good punt. And actually they rang me up and they said, would you be a driver in Micro Machines 2? And I said, yes, on one condition, that when it's AI, when I'm an AI driver, I want to be the fastest.
Nice.
And because the real reason I said that was because I was just terrified that they would make me the slowest. Because when I play Mario Kart, I don't know, on the SNES, I'd always got under the impression that Bowser's the slowest when you're playing the AI characters. And it's like, oh, here comes Bowser, who'd be Bowser? And it's like, I didn't want to be the Bowser, of Micro Machines. So I said, can I be the fastest? And they said, well, no, you can't be the fastest because Spider's always the fastest. We've established that in Micro Machines 1. And I accepted that. And I said, well, can I be the second fastest? They said, yeah, okay. So I don't know if that ever happened, if I'm the second fastest AI in Micro Machines 2. But that was that's what they said they'd do.
I feel like I need to play it again now to test it out.
Yeah, when you let me know. I'd love to know. They might have just got spiteful and we will teach her for being demanding.
Well, you've been in a few games as well, where we were just talking earlier about Normality Inc. as well. So could you just tell us about a few games that you've been in?
So Normality Inc. was another one. Now, I wrote about the games that I've been in for Guru Larry's book Fact Hunt, and I did that about a year ago, and I'm struggling to remember because at the time I was like, what was it again? But Normality Inc. I did motion capture for. We did a feature on Bad Influence about how they had the first motion capture studio in Europe, and we were demonstrating how motion capture worked. And it was, so wow and new, and you put these bubbles on, and the cameras recognise the lights, and then the computer, can draw the skeleton from the bubbles. All of that everyone does every day now on, skeleton recognition on camera things on home consoles. But it was a big deal back then, of course. I was a character. Character was based on my movements, basically. There was a Peter Gabriel game. Do you remember Peter Gabriel's Eve?
I It rings a bell, but yeah.
I didn't expect. Don't worry, I didn't expect you to say yes. It was a multimedia art project. It wasn't so much a game, although there were it was game-like in some respects. But Peter Gabriel invested a fortune into this into this software package called Eve, and I did some interviews for it and bits and pieces. And then a friend of mine, who's a computer journalist called Tim Norris, emailed me a couple of years later and said, have you ever fallen out of a suitcase and said, I can't remember what he said. Have you ever fallen out of a suitcase and said something like, you can be whoever you want to on the internet, or something like that? And I'm like, not that I recall. And he told me that apparently this is what happens in this Eve game. So I might be retelling that slightly incorrectly, but obviously something quite weird. I've never played it. I got sent a copy, and I don't think, and I've probably got it in my loft, but I didn't ever find that bit.
I'm looking at a couple of screen grabs of it now. It looks a bit surreal.
If it's Peter Gabriel, it will be surreal.
What else? Okay, so there's a Gabriel Night 2. I'm an extra in Gabriel Night 2.
Oh, amazing.
Which was a big full motion video game. Back in the mid-90s, everyone thought full motion video games were the next big thing, interactive movies, all of that. And we did something went to Hollywood and did some filming on Bad Influence about how all that would, how all that worked. So basically it was a film about a film shoot, because that's mostly how the FMV was made. What else? Micro Machines. Have I mentioned 5 yet?
No.
5?
No.
What if I missed out? I've missed something out. I'm sure there are 5. Normality Inc, Gabriel Knight 2,
Eve, Micro Machines. One more.
Machine 2. Oh man, that's going to torment me. You're going to have to get fact hunt.
Yeah, get Larry's book. It's in there.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you mentioned then about, when you went to Hollywood, obviously in series 4 of Bad Influence, you kind of changed from in studio to presenting the global reports. Why did this change happen then, and what kind of memories do you have of the travels then? I know we've talked about the N64 already.
Yeah. I can't really remember what happened. All I can remember is that I felt like I'd won the jackpot.
I bet.
Yay! Because it was brilliant, because not only did I get to go off and do all the global reports, but they gave me my own bit to write and present. So there was a bit called Virtual Violet, like a 3-minute column, if you like, opinion piece. So every week I would do my sort of 3-minute, I can remember covering things like, the early internet. And I can remember doing one that was spun off from Command & Conquer, the new Command & Conquer game, where you could play the baddies, about the joy of being the baddie in a game and stuff like that. So it's just generally sort of opinion pieces, thought pieces, but me in front of a green screen and sort of like clips from games and illustrating my ideas and my thoughts about gaming issues or gaming hardware or gaming, ideas at the time. And I think maybe they just thought this was playing to my strengths, because I was I was writing columns and writing about games. And I guess they wanted, I can't remember why Z Wright left. I can't remember Namrood left in that series. There was a big reshuffle, and I'm not quite sure why it was. I guess maybe after 3 series, maybe commissioners come in and say, maybe we need to change it up a bit. And they got a new presenter in the studio, Sonia. Yeah. It might have been that they wanted more female. It might have been they wanted more female presence to keep that 50-50 balance that I told you about, that was so important to us, to have more female role models, maybe. And they might have thought, we then need to get another, I don't really know. But maybe all those things came into play. I can't quite recall. I was just delighted.
Well, why did this show end?
Well, there were changes at CITV, I think. I'm really racking my brain now. So it went for 4 series. And it was a bit weird the way it ended when it did, because I can remember the last series we were publicising, we were talking about PS1, and it was like, this is just around the corner, the PlayStation. And then we never quite got to that next generation. But I think there were big changes at CITV. CITV wasn't much longer for this world after Bad Influence in a way, was it? It sort of, when did it? I know it was another 5 years. It was when I was doing.
I think it had a SMTV live period, and then slowly tailed off.
But I was doing my own shows at this point, and I went on to, did I take a little bit of a break? And then I took a bit of a break from game stuff because things started repeating. Do you know that feeling about things repeating when you've been doing something for long enough and you sort of get stuff in and you're like, oh, I've been here before.
Yeah.
And so I took I went more into science coverage and science and engineering and computers and the internet and more kind of broader, kind of more grown up stuff. I did a lot of stuff for the World Service. I had my own show on World Service radio about technology across the world and stuff like that. So I kind of grew up a bit. And then before then diving back into games for Gamepad. So,
That was a daily show, wasn't it, on Bravo, Gamepad?
Gamepad did go out every day, but actually we would make them in batches. So I mean, how that started off was I got asked to do GameSpot. Do you remember the website GameSpot?
Yeah.
Yeah.
GameSpot. So I got asked to present GameSpot TV, which was just like a reversioned version of an American show. And I had kids at this point, and this was after I'd done the Big Bang. I'd done lots of science and engineering, and I'd got kids at this point, and they asked me to present it. And I hadn't done games for a little while, and I thought a bit, oh, should I, shouldn't I? But to be honest, I had 2 small children and not much work, so I said yes. And I presented that just as a presenter, and it was really fun, and it was so brilliant to get back into games and to see what I'd sort of been missing while I hadn't been quite so, involved in it all. And then for the next series, the TV channel asked my company to make it from then on. And so we made GameSpot, and then we made Gamepad at Bravo, and then my company made Gamepad 2, Gamepad 3, and Gamepad 4. And that was a real laugh because that was the whole era of that was the tail end of Dreamcast. So that was Xbox. Help me out here.
GameCube.
Yeah. Yes, it would have been GameCube. So
kind of going into the PS2, maybe.
Yeah. Was it? Yeah, we had loads and loads of PS2 stuff. Exactly, PS2 era. That's right, exactly. That was like a whole new sort of generation of stuff. So it was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. And at that point, we had our own production company, and I was like running it and writing it, and like my kids were like in the office, and that was a happy family. And then we made that in batches. You see, we made that we'd make, I don't remember how many now, 10, 20 shows maybe. And then they would put it out every day, and then they would repeat it, and then they would repeat it, and they would repeat it. And so that's how Bravo seemed to operate, that they would repeat the heck out of everything. But so we tried to make the shows as far as you can, as untied to, events and news, if you see what I mean, because we knew we can't completely do that with games, but we knew they would repeat it. So we tried to make it as safe, or at least not be silly about what we were doing. It's brilliant.
It's been incredible getting your memories about, your time in gaming television. I mean, here we are like 25 years later, still talking about Bad Influence. I mean, why do you think it's so fondly remembered all these years on?
Do you know what? Even though I sort of talk from my perspective of making a lot of games TV on satellite and the Children's Channel and so forth, the only mainstream games television I did was Bad Influence. And there's partly a reason for that, because there was very little mainstream games television. I mean, even things like, Games Master, okay, it was broadcast, it's sort of mainstream, but it was still in that sort of niche slot. That Channel 4 one, was it called Bits?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was in a very late night sort of slot. So, that sort of getting that big audience, that proper big, everyone was watching an audience, like Bad Influence is the one. And you know what? I feel so lucky because, that was the time. I don't know what stars aligned that allowed a TV show with video games coverage to appear in such a mainstream slot, because I can tell you that I have had those conversations with commissioning editors on, the main channels, ever since. For years I had them. I could get shows away on the satellites, on games. I could never get them away on the main channels. And there was just something about TV commissioners. I used to always think it was that they were because they all, so many of them had arts backgrounds. Because, you know, I do a lot of computers and technology and science, programming, you know, engineering, all of that. And all those shows are a bit harder to get away, I feel. Maybe it's just my perspective. Maybe everyone says the same thing. But I just wondered if it was just not, never quite considered cool enough. And now I think, personally think it's all had its day, in a sense, on mainstream TV. And I tell you why. Because I think I'm so lucky. I got that one golden period when no one could get hold of any footage. Like, you know, we were so excited to see, there's a bit of footage of a new game. The only thing you could get was in a magazine. But now, you know, everyone can get hold of that footage and they can all make their own TV shows about it on the internet. And that's fantastic. People can find what they want now on the internet. So I don't really see a need for that sort of show, mainstream show, again. So it kind of was of its kind of era and could only have happened then. And, you know, and we were lucky for that. And we were also lucky that people couldn't, like, criticise us on Twitter the whole time we were on television. That's the other thing I'm grateful for.
I also think you guys were like the main kind of source of female representation in games. There was, I think, without Bad Influence, it would have been a very kind of boys clubby world in video games in the 90s.
And I'm really, really feel lucky for that as well, because, you know, it's like the amount of women who have got in touch with me and said, you know, I'm a programmer now, but I watched Bad Influence and I just thought it was me. And, you know, obviously I had that feeling when you said to me right at the start of this, you know, were you always into computers? And my answer was yes, but I was one of 3 girls in the entire year, you know, who wanted to do that. And I have no idea to this day. I used to always baffle me why other girls didn't seem to want to play video games. I found it completely incomprehensible that you wouldn't just want to, you know, get involved. But I don't think, you know, I wasn't the only one and haven't been the only one. And it's just one of those sort of things where I think kind of almost like the blindfold has slowly come off society, that people kind of, oh yeah, hang on, it is okay. And and that's something that happened slowly. But while that whole process has happened, there have been, you know, girls, women who have been able to see me being enthusiastic about games as a role model. And that's so amazing. I'm so thrilled that that's the case. That's just brilliant.
Recently, you did an interview with Brenda Romero at the Cambridge Computer Centre. Are you still involved in the gaming world, and what are you up to nowadays?
I'm involved in writing for games these days. So that interview with Brenda, which I was so honoured to be asked to do, I don't normally do that kind of thing these days, but I couldn't turn it down. It was brilliant. That's atypical of what I do. But you might recall that I said right at the beginning that I always wanted to be a writer, and that was my whole impetus for going off and studying the feet of Tolkien. Well, nowadays I write for films and games and immersive and interactive experiences in public spaces. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but what it basically means is all kinds of things, but quite often at kind of museums and galleries and visitor attractions, from theme parks to the Science Museum. You might come across a film or a game or a VR experience or a gesture recognition sort of device thing that would have a story. And the sort of thing I do is mostly factual entertainment. So just like the days of Bad Influence, where I told you that Bad Influence was, you mentioned Games Master, that was an entertainment show, but Bad Influence was factual entertainment. We were telling you something about the world through kind of games and sort of fun, if you like. And so that's what I still do. So like I will, sort of serious games. So I will find out information about, I don't know, something about how the world works, and it will be a gaming experience around that's for a public space, or it will be an immersive film that is designed to kind of put you in a certain emotional state or make you feel a certain way, a game with a purpose. So that's my main things that I do. But I also I have done some writing for games, as in traditional type games on PC and so forth. Unfortunately, all the ones I've ever worked on have never seen the light of day, and I'm sure that from doing all these interviews for the Retro Hour that you have come across a lot of those. Would you say that?
Yeah.
Quite common, but doesn't mean that the work doesn't go in and you don't sort of like get the full experience. So just various different kinds of games, immersive experiences, all the rest of it, but just the writing side these days, which is tremendous.
Oh, well, Violet, it's been an absolute pleasure getting your stories from your time on gaming television. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for asking me. It's like, I think I was like really finding it struggling to get the memories at the beginning there, but like by the end they were like, it's funny to kind of open up your, sort of get into the mode, you kind of realise how much there is there to talk about, actually, isn't it?